One of the big issues out there regarding these elections is whether these elections will open the way for President Erdogan to, first of all, consolidate his power over the Turkish political system, but also to push for a constitutional change that would allow for the presidential system to be introduced. Normally, you can do it two ways in Turkey. One is to have a direct constitutional change in parliament, but for that, his former party would need to win 2/3 of the parliamentary seats, which is not going to happen. That's not a realistic prospect. The second way that you can do it is if the party gets more than 3/5 of the seats, so 60% of parliament, then they can force a referendum on the subject, which is essentially the more realistic political target from the standpoint of the ruling party. And but it can only happen if there is no fourth party in parliament, meaning that the Kurdish party HDP, that polls around 10%, would have to fail to clear the threshold, in which case 3 parties would be represented in parliament, and the ruling party would then get the majority that it seeks to push ahead for a constitutional referendum. There are essentially perhaps 3 major issues at stake in relation to these set of elections in Turkey. One we've already discussed is the prospect of the change in the constitution so as to introduce the presidential system. The second one is really the fate of the Kurdish settlement process, because that will be very much impacted by the scenario that emerges out of these elections. If the Kurdish party clears the 10% threshold and gets to be represented in parliament, that would obviously give them a lot of influence in the parliamentary system, which they can use to continue with the negotiations of this significant issue. But if the Kurdish party fails to clear the threshold, then they will get no representation in parliament, which is then likely to lead to instability in Turkey's southeast, possibly a return to violence, if the more radical elements of the Kurdish constituency come to be empowered by that. The third issue really is the evolution of the relationship between the presidency and the executive. Insofar as today the executive is the branch of the government that essentially is empowered by the current constitution, but President Erdogan wants to change it, but even if he doesn't change it, he would still like to operate as a de facto president, if not a de jure president.